Hey, welcome back, guys. So in this video I want to talk about something very important as far as web development is concerned, and that is DOM. So DOM is acronym for Document Object Model, and the way to think about it is it's an interface that allows JavaScript to talk to your HTML, right, directly. And the essentially what this does is it allows you to use JavaScript to control what shows up on the browser when you run your HTML file. And thinking about this, you can already see how powerful it is, because without that your HTML will pretty much just be um, a very static page that doesn't really show dynamic content or doesn't have any capabilities for interactivity, right? um, but with the DOM and JavaScript having access to the DOM, it's easy to create really dynamic and interactive web pages, right? So um, think of it as JavaScript is JavaScript considers your HTML file to be an object, and it calls that object document. And that document object has a number of properties and methods, and it is those properties and methods that JavaScript uses to be able to create that dynamic nature of web pages. Now let's just see, for instance, if we have a JavaScript file and then we have an HTML file. The moment we link the HTML file and the JavaScript file using the script tag, it means that the JavaScript file has access to this HTML document through the document object, right? So you can see console.log documents. Now this document is basically an object that represents the entire HTML file that is linked to this JavaScript file. I hope that makes sense. So let's see what this gives us. So when we log documents, we see a bunch of things. So we have location, we have the body, right? We have the document body, and let me see if we have the head. Of course we have the head, right? And inside the head excuse me, you have a bunch of other things. So this is a lot. This is all of the things that you get access to when you invoke the document object from your JavaScript code, and it is access to all of this that makes it possible for us to use JavaScript to create really dynamic web pages. So we're going to start seeing them in action shortly. So this is a preview of what we are going to be seeing. So first of all, you can use JavaScript to modify already existing elements, right? And to be able to do that, you need a way to be able to get a hold of that element. For instance, we have an element, an h1 element here, that has an ID of h1, and it simply just says let's learn JS, and that's what we see in the browser, and that's the only thing on our browser, right? So we can use JavaScript through the DOM to basically modify this text, or to even remove this, right? Such that even though we have it written here, dynamically you can write JavaScript that removes it. Okay, so to be able to do that, we need a way to get a hold of it, and that is where DOM selectors come in. So DOM selectors allow us to target existing HTML elements within our HTML file, and then do with it whatever we want. And to select elements, we have all of these available to us. So we have document.getElementById, we have document.getElementByClassName. So getElementById allows us to grab that element using the ID attribute, and getElementByClassName allows us to get a hold of that element using the class. For instance, if we have paragraphs, and let's say we have paragraphs and they have a class of text, and then let's say we want to make it 3. Okay, cool. So we have these 3 paragraphs and they all have class of text. So let's say we want to dynamically add contents to these paragraphs. We can do that, but before we can do that, we need to select the paragraphs, right? So here is where we can use document.getElementByClassName. Okay, so getElementByClassName will typically get an array of elements that belong to a particular class, because the idea of class attribute is that you are able to have multiple elements that share the same class attribute. Okay, so usually when we do getElementByClassName, we get an array of all the elements that have that class attribute. Okay, so let's just kind of see this in action. So we can put it in a variable. So we can write a variable and say const h1, and then we'll say documents dot get element by id, and then we can do h1. Okay, so if we log this to the console, and then we can see h1, let's save that. Let's also save this. So cool. So we basically see these elements, right? So basically see this. So what if we do, let's get the class. So we can say documents. Okay, let's call this paragraphs. I'll just call it elements. So we do documents dot get element by class name, and then we put the class, the class is the class is text. So we'll say text, and then we'll save. So let's log elements now. So this gives us an array. So this basically gives us an array of all the elements that has a class of text, and they are all paragraphs, as you can see, p text. Okay, so yeah, that's how you can that's 2 ways to get a hold of elements in the DOM. So if you look here, you see that we have some others. We have tag name, so you can also do get element by tag name. So in that case, you would just be get element by tag name. You can just do get element by tag name, so you can just do p, right? And then let's change this and call it p, and let's log p and see what it gives us. Okay, so basically we get something called a node list. Now what I want to show you now is how we can actually manipulate an element. After we've selected it, we need to manipulate it. But before I do that, we have another selector here called document or query selector. So if you don't do document or get element, there is also another option it gives us, and that is query selector. So we can do Oh, I made a mistake here. It was actually supposed to be tag name. Yeah, tag name. So yeah, so basically it's this, it gives us the same thing we got when we did class name. So basically it gives us an HTML collection of all the um elements in that tag. So we have, we have 3 paragraphs. So paragraph is a tag name. Okay, so now let's talk about query selectors. So we can do document or query selector instead of saying document or get elements by either class name or ID. So for instance, see this guy here, our h1, for instance. If we wanted to select our h1 again, instead of doing document dot get element by ID and then passing h1, okay, so we passed h1 here because that is the ID of the element we are interested in. Look at it here. Okay, so instead of doing get element by ID, we can do query selector. So we do query selector. Now because we are using this selector, so we have to, and it's an ID, the attribute is ID, so we can use the hash symbol to show that it's an ID, and this should still work fine. So if we wanted to do class name, so we can do query selector all. So if we do query selector all, it will select all the elements with a class of text. So remember that when we are doing a query selector, we have to add the symbol. So we have to add the hash symbol if it's an ID. We have to add a period if it's class, right? So let's log this to the console and see what it gives us. First of all, let's log this guy, and you see it gives us basically the same thing. Now what if we did query selector and then we put text? Now what will happen is it's going to give us the first element that has the class text, right? That's what query selector does. If we apply query selector to HTML collection, it will give us the first element that matches that selector. But if we want to get all the elements that match that selector, we have to add query selector all. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now we've talked we've said a lot about selecting elements and querying elements. Now let's talk about actually manipulating these elements. So you can assess, after you have selected the element, you can manipulate it either by assessing the content. So the content is this. So this is the text content, the content that comes between the opening and closing tag of a particular element is the text content. So we can dynamically change this text content. So for instance, let's get rid of this guy. So we have our h1 element. We can decide to say h1 dot text content, and then we say learning DOM, and then we save. So what this is going to do is that instead of saying let's learn JavaScript like we have here, it went ahead to modify it and it says learning DOM. So even if we didn't have anything here, we can dynamically add it using JavaScript. Okay, so that's what we've done. Excuse me. So we can also do the same thing for the group of elements, like the one that has class of text. So let's say we want to add content to this dynamically. All we have to do is we need to do const elements, and then we do query selector all. Okay, so we need to stick to one so that we already know that we can use either query selector or we can do get element by either ID or whatever. So let's stick to query selector. Okay, so we do document dot query selector. So because we want access, we want to get all of the elements that have a class of text. So we use query selector all, and then class is texts. Cool. Now this gives us an array, so we can't just do element.text content like we did here, because this one is just one single DOM node, but this one gives us an array, so we have to loop through the array, and then for each of the elements in that array do something similar to this, right? So that's what we're going to do. So we'll do for each, actually we'll do a for loop. So we'll say let I equals 0, and then I less than or equal to elements dot length, and of course we want to add our increment. So what we want to do is we say element, so elements on position I will basically do dot text content. And what we want to do now, we're going to use I'm going to introduce template literal here, because if we do the normal string concatenation that we've been using, we'll run into a little bit of an issue. So we're going to use template literal, and the way to use template literal is when you want to add dynamic content to a string. Remember how we would have done text? So what I want to do is, what I want to log out, or what I want to add in the as a text content would be, this is paragraph 1. So for the first iteration it will say this is paragraph 1. For the second iteration it will say this is paragraph 2, and for the third it will say this is paragraph 3. Okay, but that might not happen. You know what, let's give it a try. So I'll say this is paragraph, and then I do I. Okay, so why am I getting this? Okay, I forgot I. Okay, so yeah, so this is going to log, this is going to show this in the, okay, let's take a look at our browser. What happens? Document or query selector or that's on 0. Oh, it's text, not text, so there is S here. Okay, so let's check that again. Cool. So we are getting, this is paragraph 0, this is paragraph 1, this is paragraph 2. Of course this is happening because the first paragraph has an index of 0, so we are putting I here, so I has an index of 0. Now if we want it to start with 1, what we can do is we can do I plus 1, but this is going to give us a very strange result because of how JavaScript works. So what JavaScript did here is basically it thought 1 is a string, and it basically saw this plus as not an addition operator but a concatenation, just like this one here, right? So that's why we are getting, instead of just doing the arithmetic operation, adding 0 to 1 to give us 1, it just considered 1 as a string, and then just concatenated it together with 0. The same thing with here, the same thing with here. So there are a couple of ways we can fix that. but the easiest is to use template literal. So template literal is another way of having dynamic content inside a string, but this time around we do instead of using the regular quote, we use backtick, and then we put whatever we want directly inside the backtick. That's the string value we want to output. So we can say this is paragraph. Now for the dynamic value, we will have to start with a dollar sign and then curly bracket, and then we do I plus 1. Okay, so we'll save that and take a look again. So you see it fixes it. So that is template literal. So template literal is uh, a provision of a newer version of JavaScript for doing string concatenation, and I kind of prefer it. It looks a lot neater and easier to use. So whenever you want to put a dynamic content, just do dollar sign and curly bracket, and all your dynamic content can go inside the curly bracket. As a matter of fact, you can write actual, you know, JavaScript inside this curly bracket. Okay, so yeah, that's basically, so we've seen how we can select elements and also manipulate it. I mean, you can also do things like adding classes and toggling classes and all that. So um so in the next lesson, we're going to see in the next video, we're going to see more of how we can use JavaScript to modify elements in the HTML document. So I'll see you in the next video.